Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today we are looking back at the old school seasons of Survivor. Those are the seasons ranging from Borneo, the very first season, up through Guatemala, which was season 11. Now I know I've already looked at all of these seasons individually, however, I have yet to take a look at them as a whole, and a lot of hardcore Survivor fans like to define eras in the show's history, and in my opinion, Borneo up through Guatemala was the old school era. It was the era before the advantages really came into the game. So how do these seasons stand up to the more modern seasons as a collective rather than as individual pieces to a larger puzzle? So let's take a look. But before we get into that, just in case if you guys haven't watched any of my other Survivor content, I just want to briefly go over my introduction to Survivor. The earliest memory that I have watching Survivor was when Survivor Thailand was airing in the fall of 2002, and I watched every season when it aired on CBS up through Redemption Island. For non-Survivor fans, that was season 5 up through season 22. Now, I stopped watching it for a while, largely because I got bored of it, if I'm being 100% honest. I watched 2 seasons of the show a year for around 10 years, and I was constantly watching VHS tapes that my mother recorded of earlier seasons during the summer months when Survivor wasn't on, and that's how I saw Survivor Africa and Marquesas at the time. We moved so much that she lost her Borneo and Australian Outback tapes, and that's why I didn't see them until literally last year, like January, February 2020. And that's basically it. And I only got back into the show just within the last couple of years by sheer coincidence and nothing beyond that. Ever since I started watching the seasons that I never saw on CBS, everything post-Redemption Island, I was craving to go back and rewatch the first 11 seasons, since that's the time that I initially fell in love with the show. Now let's examine the past, and we're going to start off by looking at the locations. The first 11 seasons took place in 10 different countries. It started with Borneo on the little island of Palau, then it went to the Australian Outback, then Kenya, then the Marquesas Islands and the French Polynesia. If I'm not mistaken, I think that was part of Tahiti. Thailand, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, the Pearl Islands of Panama, that's where seasons 7 and 8 were filmed, Vanuatu, the Islands of Fire, Palau, which was a part of Micronesia, and Guatemala. The first 11 seasons were filmed in 5 continents. Oceania had 4 seasons filmed there, North America had 3, Asia had 2, and Africa and South America both had 1 season each. Now, most of the seasons had the contestants on a beach on the ocean with 4 exceptions. In the Australian Outback, the contestants were on lakes and dry riverbeds. Africa was literally in the desert. The Amazon and Guatemala, they were on the river. The Amazon, they were on the Amazon River, obviously. I just had a brain fart. These exceptions over time would get fewer until they became non-existent. Say what you want about old school Survivor, but no 2 locations were the same. Even in All-Stars, when they filmed in the Pearl Islands again, that sentiment would ring true up until Survivor Samoa and Heroes vs. Villains. From that point on, production filmed 2 seasons back-to-back in the same location, and ever since 2016, they've been in Fiji and never left. And 2 of the gnarliest seasons happened during this old school period. That was Africa and Guatemala. And I want to add a 3rd season in there. I want to add Survivor the Amazon. The Amazon was no fucking picnic. In Africa, at one point, the contestants were drinking literal elephant shit through no choice of their own. And some contestants from Survivor Africa even got dysentery during the game. If you don't believe me, go watch interviews that Lex Vandenberg did after the game. He was very open about all the health problems that he developed as a result. Then you had Guatemala, where the temperatures were high and the crocodiles were always waiting at the bottom of the river. And I just said the Amazon and the Australian Outback were no picnic either, to be fair. You know, Heidi from Survivor the Amazon had to go to the hospital for kidney failure and temporary paralysis after being bit by a spider at one point. Now, Amy O'Hara from Survivor Guatemala gave an interview with Entertainment Weekly back in 2020. For those that don't know or don't remember, she was the cop that sprained her ankle in the middle of a challenge that season. She was asked, quote, "If you could make one change to any aspect of Survivor, what would it be and why?" Her response was, quote, "I say keep it tough. It's gone a little soft. Tough locations, challenges, you name it. When you keep it like that, it adds another layer of your overall strategy you have to consider," end quote. And I agree with her sentiment. That sums up the locations from this time period perfectly. They were tough, and the contestants had to take that into consideration with their strategies. It's probably not a good idea to vote out your fishermen too early, or else you'll starve. Nowadays, the tribes vote out their fishermen all the time because Fiji is fucking plentiful. Now let's take a look at the casting from this time period. The casting during this time period in the show was very diverse, and not diverse in the way that you're thinking. Diverse as in many people from different walks of life. Not here's X amount of black people compared to X amount of Asians, so on and so forth. For a while in the show's history, the casting simply came down to these 10 people from California, 6 to 7 from New York, and these 3 to 4 people from the sticks. When Jeff Probst was always saying at the beginning of these 16, or was always saying in the beginning that these 16 or 18 strangers have to work together to survive, he truly meant it. Let's look at the first season's casting. Let's just see how many people came from different states. There were only 3 people from California, 2 from Wisconsin, 2 from New Jersey, and 1 from each state. Kansas, Arkansas, Tennessee, Colorado, New Hampshire, Florida, New York, Virginia, and Rhode Island. That was a cast of 16 people from 12 different states. Now let's look at a completely random season from this time period. Let's look at Survivor the Amazon. 5 people were from California, 2 from Missouri, and 1 from each. Maryland, Texas, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Colorado, Illinois, New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania. That was another cast of 16 people from 10 states and 1 city-state. Technically 11 states, but Washington, D.C. is a city-state, to be fair. Now, if you look at all of these seasons, and I haven't looked at All-Star since that was a returning player season, obviously, it's usually a cast of people from at least 10 different states per season. So you genuinely had some variety in the casting, as much as you can with a 16 to 18 person season. Now, this was not to say that the casting was perfect. Many people criticize Survivor Thailand for being the worst casted season, simply for not having enough likable people on the season. At that point, the location where these people come from doesn't matter. If you're not likable, you're not likable. That's just how it is. But one could make the argument that with a 16-person cast, the audience would get to know everyone's name who was on the season by episode 3 at the latest. How many seasons of 18 to 20 players have that? In most cases, there's no way you could remember that many people. In my opinion, having a smaller cast of 16 made it easier for the audience to get into the show, and I don't want to make the claim that the people who were cast during this time period were more likable than the most recent seasons, because that is me being way too subjective. And anyone that makes that claim is not being intellectually honest about the subjectivity of said claim. Now, the show after this time period, after the old school period, was getting criticized for being more recruit heavy. And perfect examples of these types of seasons were Survivor Fiji, which only had 1 applicant and 18 recruits on the entire season. And this practice has always been there, but typically during this time there were more applicants on the show than recruits. This started to be more known going into Survivor Palau and Guatemala, but it would really rear its ugly head, starting in the Cook Islands. That season, only 6 people out of that 20-person cast actually applied to be on the show. Survivor China had 5 people apply for the show on a 16-person season. Some seasons had only 3 or 4 people apply for the show out of an 18 to 20-person cast. And I'll leave a link to a Google Doc that fans have created to track this. Now, I must give a fair warning for this. It may not be the most accurate tracking, but it's the best thing that we have so far. Now let's look at the gameplay from the past, and gameplay during this time was unique if you're a newer fan and have never seen these older seasons. I can't really judge the first season too harshly because, to be fair, it was the first season of the show and no one really knew what they were doing, and that goes for both players and the production staff. Hell, no one knew what they were doing in the Australian Outback either, to be fair. In short, the first 2 seasons of the show were just a straightforward game, and as basic as you could make it. It wasn't until the 3rd season, that was Survivor Africa, when there was a twist on the gameplay. The mega twist was the tribe swap, and that twist is still used in the show to this day to varying degrees of success. This wasn't the only twist of the gameplay that was attempted during this time. The next thing we saw was the delayed merge in Thailand, and I remember that was so unpopular at the time that it was never attempted again. And it's just like it sounds. The 2 tribes live on the same beach, but instead of merging at 10 like they normally did back then, they would merge at 8, and no one was told until the final 10 immunity challenge. We then see not one, but two Battle of the Sexes during this time. That was Survivor the Amazon and Vanuatu. Survivor the Amazon was the better of the two, given that you had a stronger cast, and it played into the location of the season, because if you look at the history of the Amazon, there were, all-female tribes, so a Battle of the Sexes just made a lot of sense. Vanuatu was just a Battle of the Sexes to be Battle of the Sexes. Then in the Pearl Islands, the contestants had to play with the clothes on their backs on day one for the entire duration of the game. Sure, that doesn't sound physically tougher, but it was probably tougher mentally. And if we're looking at these twists, with the exception of the delayed merge, none of these twists were truly game-breaking. Even the hidden immunity item from Guatemala wasn't really game-breaking. It had to be played before the votes were cast, and once Gary Hogaboom played the idol, it wasn't reburied. It was a one-and-done twist. Gameplay in general was simpler back then. Sure, there were strategists like we see them today, but most of those people didn't end up winning the game. The people that were strong athletically, like Colby Donaldson, didn't win the game. Gameplay during this time was a lot more social because no one could rely on the hidden immunity idol, or the legacy advantage, or the steal a vote, or the extra vote advantage. The list just goes on and on and on and on and on back then. The only way to stay on top of the game was to be in with the vast majority of people while not pissing them off, and that was Survivor in terms of gameplay during this old school period. So now that we're done talking about gameplay, let's examine the winners. Now, winners back during this time had varying gameplay strategies. You had Richard Hatch as the first winner, and he played more strategic by forming the alliance of four with himself, Sue, Kelly, and Rudy. Then the very next season, Tina Weston won with more of a social game strategy over Colby's athletic strategy. The point was made early on that there was no blueprint for this is how you win Survivor. Other than Richard Hatch and Tom Westman, no one else really won based on their strategic gameplay. Brian Heidick won because he was the lesser of two evils in Thailand. Jenna won the Amazon because Matt put so many people off with his knack of being strange. Amber won because Boston Rob pissed a lot of people off in All-Stars. And Chris won Vanuatu for being the last man standing along with his political game. There were varying different play styles that won the game back then. And this is an important note. Only 14 women have won the game of Survivor up to this point in 40 seasons. 6 of them won during the old school period. You had Tina that won the Australian Outback, you had Vesepia win the Marquesas, Jenna Marasca win Amazon, Sandra won the Pearl Islands, Amber won All-Stars, and Danny won Guatemala. If we expand this period out to heroes versus villains, only 2 other women have won the game up to that point. Parvati wins Micronesia, and Natalie White won Samoa, with Sandra obviously winning twice during this period after winning both the Pearl Islands and Heroes Villains. But let's stick to Borneo up through Guatemala. 6 women and 5 men won the game, and you could really make the claim that this period of time really was anyone's game. It sucks being a female player in today's game because today's Survivor values more strategic players over social players, and most of the women that won in the old school period played more social games than strategic ones. Men just play more strategically, with some exceptions. Women play more of a social game, again, also with some varying exceptions. And people complain nowadays that it's harder for women to win the game. Well, women don't win the game as much anymore because the game has shifted to value strategy over everything else. You could really make the case that sometimes change is not for the better. So what happened? I believe that this was the work of outside forces. I believe that the shift happened as soon as Rob Cesternino's podcast got popular. That was RHAP. Rob Cesternino in Survivor the Amazon was a strategic player. On his podcast, all he values is strategy. Now, I'm not saying that he is solely responsible for the change in values of the game, but I do believe that he did play a role in that shift. Now, what did it take to win the game in the old school period? I personally can't pin it down with the varying reasons why people won. Some were fuck you votes, Vesepia winning over Nalia and the Marquesas, Amber winning over Boston Rob and All-Stars. Some were pure social game like Sandra and Jenna. And others were because of their strategic game like Richard Hatch and Tom Westman. Like I said in the beginning of the section, there was not one single way to win Survivor. In my opinion, this was a better time because now in order to really win, you have to be this grandmaster strategist, which really didn't exist during this time with a couple of exceptions. Now let's examine the memorable moments from the show. And there's one common thing amongst all of the memorable moments of this time period. So let's take a look at those. You had Mike Scoopin falling into the fire in the Australian Outback, Lex and Big Tom in the hot air balloon, Lex and Ethan in the African village, that was from Survivor Africa, Jenna and Heidi stripping for chocolate and peanut butter in the Amazon, Johnny Fairplay's dead grandmother lie in the Pearl Islands, the Tribe of One in Palau. Hell, I would even put the Guatemala pool party in here. Now, what do most of these have in common? With the exception of the dead grandma lie, none of these memorable moments were directly tied to gameplay. Nowadays, memorable moments in the show come down to how someone played an advantage or who blindsided who. During this time, memorable moments were smaller. Some of them happened at reward challenges away from camp, or the stunt was so outrageous that no one forgot it. Jenna and Heidi the whole Jenna and Heidi stripping, Girls Gone Wild, Survivor Edition. And fun fact, they both actually posed for Playboy at the time. That's how popular Survivor was, and that's how popular that moment was from Survivor the Amazon. And sometimes it just came down to the circumstances that were never replicated in the show again, like Mike Scoopin falling into the fire or Stephanie LaGrossa being the last member of the Oolong tribe pre-merge. That is a stark difference between old school Survivor and modern Survivor. A lot of the modern fans think that a memorable moment is a blindside that happened at Final 9 or this idol getting played at Final 6 that turned the game on its head. In reality, the reason why memorable moments like Jenna and Heidi stripping for chocolate and peanut butter or Lex and Big Tom's hot air balloon ride aren't happening anymore is because the show focuses more on gameplay and less on the character moments. And that's what these memorable moments were. They were character moments. Johnny Fairplay's dead grandmother lie made him one of the best villains that the show had at this time. Yes, part of that was gameplay, but part of that was, holy fucking shit, this guy is just evil. Now, this is important to note that from this point on in the video, this is 100% opinionated, partially based on objective numbers from time to time. So let's ask and answer the question, why was the show so popular? This section in particular is all from the perspective of hindsight, and I'm not asking anyone who watched the show at the time to give me their answer. So keep that in mind. This is entirely my opinion, slightly based on the numbers. So with that out of the way, in my opinion, the show was popular from a combination of all of the elements that we touched on. That was location casting, gameplay, also the winners, and the memorable moments. But casting plays a bigger role than the other three. Location is aesthetic, sure, and if you have nothing pleasant to look at, then objectively, you have bad aesthetics. But a season of Survivor mostly lives and dies by its cast. With the exception of Survivor Thailand and Survivor All-Stars, I have not seen too many complaints about the casting of these seasons from older reviews that I found to modern ones. Great casting leads into gameplay. If you don't have enough people who understand the game, then it would be a very boring competition show. Survivor, despite having some character moments, is still a competitive reality show. If most of the people on the season are bad at playing the game, then it's not a fun game to watch unfold. Great casting leads to memorable moments. As I've stated, if you have interesting people and leave them to their own devices, then something interesting may come out of that. Now, there are memorable moments that play into circumstance, like John Carroll getting stung in the hand by a sea urchin in Survivor Marquesas, but most memorable moments come from one or two people. Lex and Ethan in the African village, Lex and Big Tom's hot air balloon ride, Jenna and Heidi stripping for chocolate and peanut butter. Even if the winner of a particular season wasn't popular with the fan base, there was still enough people on the season to offset that unpopular winner. And this wasn't true sometimes, like in the case of Brian Heidick winning Survivor Thailand. Very few people on the cast were even considered likable. In fact, at the time, many people felt that that season was the worst casted. The challenges also played a role in the show's popularity, but I feel that it was more of the down moments when you didn't see people talk game strategy or challenge strategy that really showed the strength of the show. If you have enough decent characters for an audience to get behind, then all you have to do as production is just sit back and let the game unfold, and whatever happens, happens. Now let's ask the question, what killed the show in the ratings? And I said this in my Where is the Survivor content video, but I'll repeat it here. When Survivor first premiered in May of 2000, it drew 15.5 million viewers. Those viewers jumped to 51.69 million people by the finale of the first season. When Survivor the Australian Outback premiered in January of 2001, it debuted to almost 45.5 million viewers with an estimate of 29.8 million viewers an episode for that season. The ratings hovered around 20 million viewers an episode for the season up until Guatemala, when that season had 18.3 million viewers an episode for the season. After that, it goes down and it really doesn't recover. The ratings on Survivor are still quite high for television, but it wasn't what it was 20 years ago. I'm only repeating this section just to showcase how much of a cultural event Survivor was back when it originally came out. I feel that the show's decline in the ratings comes down to two things. Let's focus on the gameplay aspect of it. In my opinion, the Hidden Immunity Idol played a factor in the ratings decline. Let's look at the numbers. The Hidden Immunity Idol was introduced in Survivor Guatemala. That season had, on average, 18.3 million viewers an episode for the season. Let's look at the ratings for the following season. That was Survivor Panama, also known as Exile Island. Don't even try to fight me. I remember when that season came out, everybody called it Survivor Exile Island. That season had an average of 16.82 million viewers an episode for the season. Let's look at the season after that, Survivor Cook Islands. Drew in 15.75 million viewers an episode on average for the season. If we're looking percentage-wise, the drop in viewers between Guatemala and Exile Island was an 8% drop. Not the worst drop in the world. Let's look at Guatemala to Cook Islands. That's a drop of around 14%. That's the story with the seasons after Guatemala ratings-wise. They went down and down and down. Some seasons did see an uptick in viewers like Survivor China, Gabon, Heroes vs. Villains, Nicaragua, but the ratings after those seasons just kept going down until you hit about 9 to 11 million viewers an episode per season on average, and that is around a 40% ratings drop at the lowest from Guatemala, onward to just over 50% at the highest. Around this time, there were other gimmick twists, not just the Hidden Immunity Idol. It was twists like let's divide the tribes based on age and gender, to dividing based on race, and then Fiji having the haves and have-nots twist. Then you had fans versus favorites. You see a rise in these gimmicks when the ratings initially start to fall. Ironically, the seasons that saw an uptick in average viewers, with the exception of Heroes vs. Villains, did not have a gimmick twist akin to what I described. The second aspect to the ratings drop is the rise in recruit casting over applicant casting, and I touched on this moment in the casting portion of this. Now, recruits have been a part of Survivor since the very first season, since Survivor Borneo. It's nothing new. Applicants are people that applied to be on the show, and a recruit could be someone who auditioned for another show or got discovered in a bar. So you have a wide spectrum for recruits. But the cast for seasons 1 through 9 had more applicants than recruits. Survivor Palau and Guatemala, the applicants to recruit ratio was almost 50-50. We then get to Survivor Cook Islands, and that season had only 6 applicants on a 20-person season. Survivor Fiji had only 1 applicant and 18 recruits on a 19-person cast. Survivor China had only 5 applicants on a 16-person season. If you're watching the show at home at the time and you wanted to apply, but the casting department is looking to find people in bars or steal them from other shows like Big Brother, then why would you watch a show where your chances of getting on it were already slim to none, going down to virtually 0? At this point, the network was just casting the pretty people and ignoring what made their show popular to begin with, and that was the diverse casting from all over the country, not just the people looking to become models or actors in Hollywood. Now, to end this retrospective off, I'm going to ask the question, can the show be saved or is it too late? And I believe that the show can be saved. It just comes down to production's willingness at the end of the day. Lately, they've been casting fewer recruits and are casting more applicants on seasons. That's a positive start. Get away from one of the things that was killing the show for a good number of years. The next thing that they have to do is get rid of the fucking gimmicks. Knock it off with the Hidden Immunity Idols and the Legacy Advantages and Steal a Vote and all these other crappy advantages that you don't need. Instead, just rely more on your cast to deliver a good season. Production needs to do what it did back in the day. Stop interfering with the game. End the Final Four fire-making challenge that's been forced upon the game since Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, with the exception of a tie vote, which up to that point only happened 7 times since the introduction of that twist. Go back to the old Final Tribal Council format where everyone on the jury gets a chance to address the finalists instead of this firing squad that's turned into since Game Changers. That's really all you need. These gimmicks that production is sticking to didn't work when they were first introduced, and they certainly don't work nowadays. The game of Survivor today is not the same game as it was prior to Survivor Guatemala. Sometimes change is not for the better. If production is too scared to pull the trigger, then ask yourself, what do you have to lose? Try getting rid of the gimmicks for a couple of years. Best case scenario, stripping all of the advantages and going back to an old school game could lead to a renaissance that the show desperately needs. Worst case scenario, it doesn't do anything to move the needle in terms of ratings, but they don't lose much. A lot of people that watch the show today probably didn't watch 15, 20 years ago. So stripping the game of the advantages that too many people have relied on and these gimmicks that just haven't worked could be something new to Survivor to a lot of their current fan base. Do I think the old fan base would come back? Probably not, since they got burned many, many years ago. Most of those people probably moved on, and at some point though, these gimmicks are going to be too much even for the newer fan base, and they're just going to lose more people as time goes on. And sometimes taking a step backwards is actually taking a step forward. And guys, that's all I've got. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys have been following me for long enough, you know I'm terrible at ending these, so I guess I will just see you guys next time.